Morning, and I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker today. Cheryl Henry is an active member of our fellowship, and she leads our small group ministry of Chalice Circles. Cheryl?
So let us pick up the stones over which we stumble, friends, and build altars. Let us listen to the sound of breath in our bodies. Let us listen to the sounds of our own voices, of our own names, of our own fears. Let us name the harsh light and soft darkness that surround us. Let's claw ourselves out from the graves we've dug. Let's lick the earth from our fingers. Let us look up and out and around. The world is big and wide and wild and wonderful and wicked, and our lives are murky, magnificent, malleable, and full of meaning. Oremus, let us pray. When I heard Padraig Otuma read his poem on Krista Tippett's podcast, I was moved. The first line of this poem, "So let us pick up the stones over which we stumble, friends, and build altars," resonated with me as it brought to mind the struggles and challenges that we faced this past year, the challenges that we faced right here in this fellowship. It occurred to me that the stones over which we stumble, the challenges that brought some of us to our knees, may very well be the foundation for stronger connection, for deeper spiritual growth. Our response to these challenges can be an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to connect with one another. And I don't believe they're accidental. I think they are gifts to us, whether we like them or not. They can offer us something we might not have had before. As people of faith, we all engage in spiritual practices, sometimes even without acknowledging them. So today I'm going to talk about some spiritual practices, and I'm guessing that you may recognize some of these as your own. When I was asked for a description of the talk I'm going to give today, this is what I wrote. Hindsight is 2020. Let's look back and see how we view this past year. What was the major impact for you? Lessons learned? Joys experienced? Let's take a look in the rearview mirror and see if our perspective has shifted over time. It's useful to declare an end to events before we move on to the next thing. Let's do that now. As I read over that description, which seems a little flippant, I have to admit I did learn some things this past year. Here's one. If you have a bump on your eyelid, get it looked at by a doctor. Don't take the word of a doctor who dismisses it and then wait for 2 years for a dermatologist to say, hey, that looks a little suspicious. Cancer of the eyelid, who knew? Well, now I do, and unfortunately so do many of you. Anyone who asked me learned much more than they may have wanted to know about this gruesome procedure required for correcting a basal cell carcinoma that was wide and deep in my lower eyelid. Thank goodness for 2 excellent surgeons who performed delicate, intricate surgeries in a delicate spot. I'll pass along their advice. Have regular checkups with your dermatologist. Wear UV protective sunglasses and a broad-brimmed hat. Another thing I learned, actually not learned anew, but was reminded not too gently, is that our time is limited. So if you make a mistake, like dragging your reluctant husband and 4 ill-behaved dogs into a house that's not suited to them or you, have the courage to admit you screwed up, apologize, disregard what other people are going to say about you, and move back to the place you realize you miss, even if that place is Bay Cliff and no one understands but you. I'm sure there were joys this past year. I'm trying really hard to think of some. And actually, the word I chose for our chalice circle this year was joy, which seems kind of ironic now, doesn't it? But there seemed to be more lessons in store for me this past year than simply joyous tra-la-las. The biggest lesson I learned is that the practice of forgiveness, both for ourselves and for others, is probably the most important of all our spiritual practices. Why do I think this? Because without forgiveness, there is no hope of opening to joy. If we don't forgive, resentment builds up, and like a clogged drain, resentment blocks joy. Resentment, holding grudges, harboring grievances, all these emotions settle in your heart, and the heart hardens. It takes a soft heart to forgive. These words are by Thich Nhat Hanh. If you pour a handful of salt into a cup of water, the water becomes undrinkable. But if you pour the salt into a river, people can continue to draw the water to cook, wash, and drink. The river is immense, and it has the capacity to receive, embrace, and transform. When our hearts are small, our understanding and compassion are limited, and we suffer. We can't accept or tolerate others and their shortcomings, and we demand that they change. But when our hearts expand, these same things don't make us suffer anymore. We have understanding and compassion and can embrace others. We accept others as they are, and then they have a chance to transform. So here we are in a fellowship of like-minded people who promise that we are going to give each other the benefit of the doubt. We actually print that on that wall right over there. We assume everyone has good intentions. Well, do you? Do you believe that everyone operates out of good intentions? Believing that requires a generous spirit. It requires a generosity of grace for others' mistakes and shortcomings. And there's also a prerequisite. What's required first is to believe that everyone is doing the best they can. Before we can be generous enough to give people the benefit of the doubt that they are operating with good intentions, we have to believe that everyone is doing their best. So let me ask you that question. Do you believe that everyone is doing the best they can? Let's do a quick exercise, courtesy of Brene Brown. Think of someone in your life who makes you crazy. Someone you just cannot stay out of judgment with. It could be siblings or parents or friends or somebody right here in this fellowship. What if God, or whatever higher power you believe in, joined us right now and said, I am here to tell you that this person is doing the best they can? What would be different for you? I did this exercise and pictured someone close to me. I wasn't going to name him. I actually took out his name, but I'm going to name him anyway. As you may have guessed, this was my husband. I don't think he'll be listening on Zoom. He can't turn on the computer, so we're safe. Okay. I happened to be irritated with him at the time, very unusual. But do you know what? When I envisioned that God came down, that's my Baptist upbringing. God came out of the closet. Well, that's another one. And said, look, Red is doing the absolute best that he can. Well, you know what? My perspective shifted, and I felt compassion for him, and I got a little sad that I had been putting my expectations on him for what I thought he ought to be doing and how he ought to be doing it. So once I thought he's doing the best he can, the judgment melted away, and my heart softened. Now, I know, like you, when I see reports on the news of abuse and neglect and violence, it's really hard to believe that everyone is doing their best. But what I do know is that my life is better if I operate out of knowing that the people around me are really doing the best they can. This perspective gives me pause to consider their difficulties and obstacles and struggles that I may not have considered when I was in the heat of judgment. So if we go through assuming everyone is doing their best, we can come from a place of forgiveness and compassion instead of judgment and resentment. Now, why do I consider this a spiritual practice? The emphasis is on the word practice, because we try to believe this about people and then we forget. We fail to give people the benefit of the doubt and we're back to judging them. So we remind ourselves and we try again. It takes practice. It's like learning anything. You try, you fail, you try again. Here's another lesson from this year. Anxiety is contagious. We've all been under stress now for almost 2 years. If we had been told that we would be locked down, masked up, and pissed off for almost 2 years, we would not have signed up for it. We are still under stress, and sometimes it's difficult to be gracious when you're under stress. An example close to home is the stress associated with providing Sunday services while being afraid we're going to die of COVID. Implementing online services without disrupting the in-person service has not been without difficulty. If you haven't been involved in the behind-the-scenes preparation, then you may not appreciate the number of challenges and snafus that we've encountered. Stress such as this can produce anxiety, and people behave differently when they're under stress and they're anxious. Some people become over-controlling and they blame others. Others of us withdraw and consider going to another church closer to the house. It's not unlike the dog situation at our home. Our smallest dog, Lola, the one we adopted from our neighbor in Bay Cliff, is a terrier mix, and she is a barker, a yapper. When she hears or sees the slightest movement, she barks a shrill, ear-piercing bark nonstop. The other dogs, big, laid-back labs, go on alert, jump up, and look around to see what the hell is going on. Yeah. Anxiety is contagious. It's the same with people. We're like that too. Some of us are terriers, and some of us are labs. So it's important that we take responsibility for the energy we bring to a group, to our relationship, and to our church. We all make mistakes. I've certainly made my share. I make smart-ass comments that I think are funny, and sometimes I hurt people's feelings. I've made the mistake of taking things personally and then withdrew when I felt unappreciated or dismissed. We've all done and said things that we regret. That's part of being human. That's why I came to church anyway, to be a better person. Sometimes it does take a higher power to help us overcome difficulties in relationships. I pray regularly for insight and guidance where I'm stuck. I pray to whoever may be listening to be a contribution and a light instead of a pain in the ass. So all this is to say that our challenges this year, the stones over which we stumble, can be the foundation of an altar. We can learn and grow and be open to the joy that is everywhere around us. This was something I learned from my confinement and disability over the past month. I was lifted from loneliness and despair by the friends who called me, texted me, dropped by to visit. They brought food, sent cards and flowers. I tried to stay focused on those friends and be grateful for their concern and caring. When I felt forgotten, I refocused on the friends that had shown up. Focusing our attention on what we're grateful for provides an opening to joy. And this, too, is a spiritual practice. Reverend Galen Gingrich, who's now the senior minister of All Souls Unitarian Church in New York City, wrote that gratitude should be the center of Unitarian Universalist theology. Two dimensions of gratitude, he wrote, make it fitting as our defining religious practice. One has to do with a discipline of gratitude, and the other has to do with an ethic of gratitude. The discipline of gratitude reminds us how utterly dependent we are on the people and world around us for everything that matters. From this flows an ethic of gratitude that obligates us to create a future that justifies an increasing sense of gratitude from the human family as a whole. The ethic of gratitude demands that we nurture the world that nurtures us in return. If the first principle of all existence, he continues, is utter dependence, then the deadliest of all sins is the effort to negate or disregard that principle through the myth of self-sufficiency. In this state of sin, salvation comes through gratitude. It is the means by which we remember both our identity and our duty. And unlike freedom, he concludes, gratitude is a uniquely religious virtue. Why is this so? A sense of awe and a sense of obligation, religion's basic impulses, are both experiences of transcendence, of being part of something much larger than ourselves. What I was reminded of was how dependent I was on my friends for comfort and joy. The cards I received, the phone calls, the visits, meant everything to me. When I felt most alone, not being able to see or read or write or drive, I was comforted by knowing that I had friends who cared and checked in. And God bless Fanny DeGesiro. I know you're listening on Zoom. Fanny drove me 2 times to Houston for surgeries at 5 o'clock in the morning, driving in dense fog and heavy traffic. God bless you, Fanny. I wanted to say God bless Red, too. He drove me everywhere else, but it was a white-knuckled experience. And mainly I prayed for the other people on the road at the time. I like these words by Barbara Kingsolver. In my own worst seasons, I've come back from the colorless world of despair by forcing myself to look hard for a long time at a single glorious thing. A flame of red geranium outside my bedroom window, and then another, my daughter in a yellow dress, and another, the perfect outline of a full dark sphere behind the crescent moon, until I learned to be in love with my life again, like a stroke victim, retraining new parts of the brain to grasp lost skills. I have taught myself joy over and over again. This is a spiritual practice, reminding ourselves to look hard at a single glorious thing, to teach ourselves joy over and over again. So these are all spiritual practices: forgiving yourself and others, living your life as though people are doing the best they can, reminding yourself that the energy you bring, terrier or lab, makes a difference, living with a grateful heart, and teaching yourself to experience joy again and again. It takes practice. You try, you fail, you try again. I'll close now with these words for a new beginning and a blessing by John O'Donohue. Sometimes, somewhere out of the edges, the night is turning, and the waves of darkness begin to brighten the shore of dawn. The heavy dark falls back to earth, and the freed air goes wild with delight. The heart fills with fresh, bright breath, and thoughts stir to give birth to color. I arise today in the name of silence, womb of the word, in the name of stillness, home of belonging, in the name of the solitude of the soul and the earth. I arise today, blessed by all things, wings of breath, delight of eyes, wonder of whisper, intimacy of touch, eternity of soul, urgency of thought, miracle of health, embrace of God. May I live this day compassionate of heart, clear in word, gracious in awareness, courageous in thought, generous in love. I hope your new year is full of love and joy and so many blessings you lose count. Happy New Year.